really great to be here for many reasons. Not only because I have roots in this area. My great-grandparents on my mother's side used to be business owners in the town of Ray, which no longer exists. It's just one humongous mine. But my great-grandparents, one set of great-grandparents, they owned a boarding house and a little shop of some sort in Ray. And their ethnicity was Basque. And from what I understand, they acted as intermediaries between the Mexican-American community and the Euro-American community in Ray. And then on my other side of the family, my father, who's mestizo, his mother was born in San Carlos. And I didn't realize until I was about 28 years of age that I was part Apache. I knew I had Native American blood, but I had no idea from which lineage. My grandmother, unfortunately, was ashamed of her Native American heritage, and she would wear a lot of face makeup to lighten her complexion and would perm her hair to hide her straight hair. And in that generation, it was fairly common. And as a little boy, I was not allowed to ask any questions whatsoever about my Native American heritage. So I have deep roots in this part of the world, and it's kind of exciting to be back here, where it kind of all began for me, literally. So part of this journey began with my own research into my own family heritage. And I would like to acknowledge a couple of folks that helped me along the way. Dr. Crandall from Dartmouth College, he is now an associate professor at our own ASU right here. So he's no longer at Dartmouth. And he was one of my committee members. This presentation is based upon my master's work. And I received a master's degree later in life. I was one of those crazy people who went back to school in his 50s. And this is kind of like a second chapter for me, of sorts. And so I was researching my own family history, and I went to the Yavapai Apache Nation, their cultural resource center, which is located in the Verde Valley. And that's their tribute to the Exodus, which is the large statue outside of their cultural resource center. And the gentleman there who still runs the facility, Mr. Vince Randall, he was able to acquire for me the census records from Fort McDowell. And I was able to find the records of my great-grandmother and my grandmother from Fort McDowell. And while I was doing that research on my own family, Mr. Randall said to me, you know, when you're doing this work, if you ever run into a story about a Lulu, let me know. And I'm like, well, who's Lulu? And he said, well, Lulu is my family, and she survived a massacre. And she was raised by whites, and she married a white man. But we don't know what happened to her. We don't know what happened to her descendants, and we want to reconnect with them because they're our family. And I didn't really give it that much thought at the time. I'm like, okay, well, if I ever run into a Lulu, I'll act upon it. The story was told to Mr. Randall, he told me, by his great uncle when he was a little boy. So when you think about the timeline here, Mr. Randall's in his 80s. So when he was a little boy, he was in direct contact with elders who survived the settler colonial period. At that time, I was working with the National Park Service. And on one day when I was really bored, I was looking through the historical archives at Montezuma Well. And there was a ranger who worked for the National Park Service with the last name Beckman. And I think he worked for the Park Service from like 1960 to 1990. And he wrote a memoir. And in his memoir, he mentions that the first settlers who lived in that part of the Verde Valley along Beaver Creek had an Indian girl living with them. And she was known as Lulu. So I'm like, this has got to be the same Lulu. I mean, what are the odds, right? A white settler family with an Indian girl living with them named Lulu. So Jack describes in his memoir that down at the outlet section of Montezuma Well, there's limestone rock carvings that were carved in the 1900s, actually in the 19th century, by Lulu and her husband, Link McKesson. So I went down there with a guest. That's me a few years ago. And behind me are the limestone rock carvings from the 1880s. One says Lula, and the other rock carving says Link McKesson. So as I began to dig further into this story, I found in the 20th century there were many publications throughout Arizona which mentioned this girl named Lulu. And they said that she was a beloved daughter of the Arnolds, and she married this man named Lincoln McKesson. And I was starting to put the pieces together. And I was wondering to myself, well, I wonder what that looked like in the 1880s. You know, a biracial couple. Link McKesson being from Nebraska. He was not Latino, he was an Anglo-American, and she was a full-blood Northern Apache. So I started wondering how they navigated the world at that time. And if they had children, how many children did they have? How did they identify as biracial children at that time? And while doing all of this, I went to Fort Verde State Park. And I spoke to the general manager. Her name is Sheila Stubler. And I said, you know, Sheila, I'm interested in a story about a woman named Lulu, who is an indigenous woman married to a white family, a white man. And if you ever find anything in your archives about a Lulu, please let me know, because I might have something here. As God is my witness, 1 week later, Sheila Stubler calls me up. She's like, Rob, you're not going to believe this. I just got an email. I'm flabbergasted. I'm going to forward it to you. So she forwards an email to me, and it reads something like this. It says, hello, my name is Christy. I don't want to say the last names. The family has asked me not to use their surnames today, the descendant community. But the email read, my name is Christy. I live in Orange County, California. I'm part Native American, but I don't know from which tribe. All I know is that my great-great-grandmother's name was Lulu, and she lived at Fort Verde. When that happened, I realized, okay, I need to run with this, because now I had the two ends of the story. I was now in contact with the descendant community living in California, and now I have a starting point with the local folklore of the white settlers that settled the Verde Valley in the 1870s and 1880s. I spent like a year looking for primary sources, because in the original secondary sources that I found, there were quotes from the Arnolds that said that they kept her in a box and that she was given into spitting and biting and such. And you know, they referred to her in derogatory terms, but I didn't have anything to verify that. So it turned out that there was a woman named Margaret Goddard who had a syndicated column throughout Arizona from the 1950s to the 1980s. And it was called Those Were the Days. And so I spent 3 weeks digging through her archive at the Klein Library at NAU, trying to find her primary sources for the quotes. But I couldn't find the primary sources. But I found more than one secondary source. So it's a pretty good, if you find more than one secondary source, is a pretty good substantiation that, you know, these things did happen. It's really important when we delve into this story to understand the ethnology of Lulu's family before she met the Arnolds or the McKessons. We know now from the branch of Northern Apache that Mr. Randall's uncle belonged to. And so she was from that branch. And they're part of the greater group called Dilzehe, or Northern Apache, also known as Tonto, but Tonto tends to be a more pejorative term. So Scientifically, from an anthropological point of view, it's called Dilzehe Apache. And the clan group that she belonged to was called Yuane. And they lived in the area that is now between the Verde Valley and up on the Mogollon Rim, areas like Happy Jack, all the way maybe to like the border of the White River people and the White Mountain people, that area. These are very consistent artifacts that were loaned to me from the Yavapai Apache Nation, along with the toys that used to be on display at Montezuma Castle. Another area of research that I go into with this is the political environment at that time in Arizona. And some things don't change very much, because even back then in the 1870s, Arizona was very politically divided. Generally, the Democrats supported a policy of extermination of the Indians, and the Republicans supported a policy of saving the Indians. So what happened in the early 1870s, President Grant won his second term. And by winning his second term, he wanted to placate to his political base. Now, many members of President Grant's political base had previously been abolitionists. And they won a huge victory with the 13th Amendment. And their next project was saving the Indian. And so there was a new policy, the reservation policy, to force the native people into reservations. Now, many of the settlers who lived in Arizona Territory at that time did not like this policy. And they knew that there was going to be a new sheriff in town, so to speak, and his name was General Crook. So they wanted to kill as many Apache as they could before the new policies went into place. And that's why when you look into 1871 in particular, you see a lot of these massacres happening all over the territory. Because a lot of folks, and it wasn't just the white settlers, it was also Mexican Americans working in conjunction with white settlers to kill Apache people. And so what happened in Lulu's case, there was evidently a raid on a wagon train, and they chased this particular band up an area called Rattlesnake Canyon, the 3rd Cavalry. And this is all documented in the after-action reports that I found, which took place in April of 1871. And there were approximately 30 Apache killed in this particular engagement. But there were 2 survivors. And I found out later on that those 2 survivors were 2 children, one of whom was Lulu. So in those days, it was not legal for a white settler family to adopt a Native American child. So how is it that the Arnolds, the father was actually the constable in Yavapai County at that time. So you know he's a law-abiding citizen. How is it that they were able to have a Native child living with them? In 1864, the first legislature of Arizona passed what's called the Howell Code. And they're basically laws pertaining to statutory laws that would be oversee the municipalities of the area. So, for instance, it was very specific. A white person could not marry a Native American, an African American, or an Asian, but they could marry a Mexican. That was a caveat. And that's very important to keep that in mind, because we find out that a lot of these Native people adopted Mexican identities in order to navigate the system. If your name was Running Bear, you couldn't go into the office and get a piece of land. But if you got baptized and changed your name to Juan Garcia, then you could buy a piece of land and vote and so forth. Another thing is that Lulu is not an outlier. As I dug into this topic, we find many Lulus. One case is Lucia Martinez, who is a Yaqui Indian who was escaping Apache. So she was captured by the Apache, And imagine now, this is a 10-year-old girl walking across the desert, surviving at 10 years of age from the Mogollon Rim, and she's walking back down to what is now the border area. And during that period of time, the 1st Arizona Regiment ran into her, and Colonel King Woolsey brought her onto his property to work in the 1860s and 1870s. By the time she was 20 years of age, she had given birth to 3 of his children. So he's a state legislator, but technically it's illegal what he's doing. So he had to figure out a way, because he wanted to run for the Senate. And he's like, I need to get rid of this girl. So she knew the territory backwards and forwards. So a wagon train came through his ranch in Agua Fria, and they needed somebody to guide their wagon train down to Yuma. He's like, I know just the person to do that. But he kept the 2 oldest children at the ranch. So Lucia wanted to get her kids back. And there was a custody battle in those days. And the reason that she was able to put up a legal fight, not only did she adopt a Mexican identity, but she found a politician who was an attorney who did not like Woolsey. Woolsey was a Democrat, and this politician was a Republican. And he said, no problem, I'd love to take your case pro bono. And she won her case. And she was able to get the custody eventually of her 2 older children. And then even a stipend. I think when King Woolsey did pass away, he was one of the wealthiest men in Arizona at that time. In those days, his net worth was probably, some people estimate, close to $200,000, which would be like a couple $100 million today. He was a very wealthy man. So the kids got a stipend from his estate when he passed. This was a huge coup for a woman of color in those days to win a custody battle like that. The other case that I came across is the case of Bessie Brooks. Now, Bessie was a Yavapai, and she was with her mother, evidently, in the area called Skull Valley. And there's a reason why we refer to it as Skull Valley, like Bloody Basin, Bloody Gulch. Some really nasty things happen in these places, and that's how they got their names. So there was a very well-known scout back then named Ed Peck, who did a lot of work in the northern part of the Arizona Territory for the U.S. government. And Ed Peck shot the mother of Bessie Brooks, her biological mother. He didn't know that the squaw was carrying a baby. When he came up to her body, he realized that there was an infant. And back in those days, there was a premium on a lot of these children. Some of the kids were being sold into the circus. So back then, these Eastern producers like P.T. Barnum or Buffalo Bill, they would buy native children to incorporate into their show. So some of these guys knew that they could make some money with these native kids. In the case of Bessie Brooks, she got very lucky. When he brought her into Prescott, one of the most affluent people in town, Hezekiah Brooks, he was the county judge at that time. He and his wife were childless, and they wanted to adopt little Bessie. And everybody in the community just assumed that they adopted her, but it was illegal for them to adopt her under the Howell Code. And legally, a little girl under the Howell Code could only live with her foster family till the age of 18. So just like with Lulu, Bessie, right around the age of 18 or 19, found herself a husband. But there was a big uproar in the community because he was a white man, and a lot of folks didn't want him to marry this native girl. And from all accounts, she spoke really good English. It's a very interesting case because she was allowed to go to school with white children. And everything I've read about Bessie Brooks, it's just exemplary. Like, the community really loved Bessie, and she was accepted by the community, except when it came to marriage and it came to money. So she finally married this young man, and they had a few children. And then Hezekiah Brooks passed away. And he was also considered an affluent person at that time. And so he left his estate to Bessie, but his nephew in Ohio disputed it, saying she could not legally inherit this estate because she's not legally adopted. And in Bessie's case, she did not win the case. She lost to the nephew. But there was a settlement where she was allowed to keep one of the Brooks properties in town. But the cash and the house she grew up in went to the nephew. This is the area that we're talking about in the Verde Valley. So you see Beaver Head Flat, Montezuma Well, basically where the I-17 runs between the Verde Valley and Flagstaff. That highway was made pretty much right on top of ancient routes, the Indian routes, and what eventually became known as the Chavez Pass or the Chavez Trail. While researching, I was contacted by a woman who, since then she's passed away, Judy Piner. She's an anthropologist who used to work for the Yavapai Apache Nation. And she said, Robert, I found something I think you're going to be interested in. So they have this photograph in their archives at the Yavapai Apache Nation. I believe the photograph was taken by a lieutenant that was stationed at Fort Verde who had the hobby of photography. And like I like to tell young people, it's not like everybody had a camera in their hip pocket like it is nowadays. In those days, photography was cumbersome. You had this big box that weighed a lot. You had to have a mule to carry your equipment and a tripod. And so to take a photograph like this was quite an endeavor. I found out that, and this is all documented through letters, that the Arnold family, whose homestead was there at Montezuma Well, they invited the commanding officer and his lieutenants to have a picnic with them. This was in 1875. The gentleman leaning against the wall is Major Brayton, Major George Brayton. He was the commanding officer in 1875 of Fort Verde. If you notice, he seems to be nursing his arm, holding his arm outside his frock coat. Major Brayton was a veteran of both the battles of Cold Harbor and Shiloh. And he had been severely wounded at Cold Harbor, where his tricep was blown off. But he continued to serve in the Army. And I suspect that's why he's holding his arm that way in this photograph. One of the lieutenants that's kneeling down in front of him, a Lieutenant Hyde, went on to become a brigadier general at the beginning of World War I. Long career. It all started right here in the Arizona Territory. If you notice to the right of Sarah Arnold with her big skirt on, there's a little girl with a darker complexion. I believe that's Lulu. And the timeline's perfect because she would have been 5 or 6 at this point. When she was discovered by the Army, the record says that there was a toddler, a 2-year-old. Some records say a 3-year-old. So we know she was pretty young. So by 1875, she would have been about 6 years of age. One other thing I want to mention, the Arnolds left Arizona for 1 year. They wanted to go to California, but they realized that there were just too darn many people living in California. And they came back to Arizona. But by the time they came back to Arizona, the prime homesteads had all been snapped up. But Mr. Arnold had been a scout, and he knew the territory very well. And he knew about this one lush, really pretty little valley at the headwaters of Cienega Creek, which is at the upper part of Agua Fria. And that mountain where their little homestead, the second homestead was located in 1880, is now called Porcupine Peak. It just went through a name change. And just down the road a piece was a gold mine called the Goldwire Mining Camp. And there was a young man working that camp named Link McKesson. Now, fortunately for me, in 1953, one of Lulu's daughters wrote a memoir. And in her memoir, she said that her father was a gold miner, and he would go into this ranch that was nearby to buy eggs, butter, milk, just some staples. Because his choice was he could ride for maybe 2 hours to get to this nearby ranch, or he could travel a full day and a half to go to Prescott. So it doesn't take a lot of imagination. It was very convenient to go to this ranch. And in her memoir, she writes that her dad told her that that's when he found out that there was this Indian girl living with the Arnolds. And at some point she became pregnant. And they spent the rest of her life together. But it all started there. Their relationship began at the headwaters of Cienega Creek. This is what's left of the cabin. This cabin was built between 1880 and 1881. It's believed to be one of the oldest post-colonial structures in Yavapai County. I'm very happy to share with you that today it's now registered in the National Registry, and the funds are now available. They're going to have an official excavation finally at this site this year, based mostly on my research. And there's also the funds available for a stabilization project and eventually an interpretive trail. It's not an easy location to get to. It's at the end of about an 8.5 mile 4-wheel drive route. And you definitely need a 4x. You can't do it in a street vehicle like a regular sedan. You can't do it. You need a Jeep or a 4x to get there. And then you got to hike about 1.5 miles to get to the side of the homestead. But the architecture is kind of unique. You know, it's not what you see typical for a post-colonial building at that time. It's more reminiscent, in my opinion, to what you see in New Mexico. We see a lot of buildings like this, which tells me that Native Americans probably at least assisted in the construction, if not did a lot of the construction. And I recently spoke with a woman who lived up at that site in the 1970s and 1980s. She and her husband owned the lease in that ranch land. And she told me that when they took over the lease, the previous owners of the lease were there since the 1940s. And they told them that, yes, in fact, they were told that that little cabin had been built with the help of Native American people. So these are some clippings that I found, and there were many clippings about the McKesson family. Link McKesson was a successful gold miner. The assay office in Prescott records that he came in with like close to $300 of gold. Now, of course, when I say that to a classroom of high schoolers, they're like, so what, $300? I'm like, that's the buying power of $50,000 today. That's a close-up of the carving of Lulu's name. She interchanged between Lulu and Lula depending on who she was with. If she was with a Mexican-American community, she called herself Lula. If she was an Anglo-American community, she became Lulu. When they left the Verde Valley, which is right around 1890, approximately 1891, from the Verde Valley, they relocated to White Hills, which is north of Kingman. And that's where the father took up silver mining. He was also a successful silver miner, I might add. And Lulu ran a business. They had a successful boarding house in town. And she made an impact on the community. Because when she passed away, people from all over the territory came to pay their respects, including a very well-known judge at that time. These are just a couple of the obituaries that I was able to find on Lulu's death. Some of the secondary sources I found said that she had 6 children, but I never confirmed that. I know for sure she had 5. She gave birth to twins at one point, a boy and a girl, but only the girls survived. The boy passed away. Of her children that survived, it's really fascinating. Same two parents, but you have three different ethnic identities. So the son always identified his whole life as a white man. And we know this because I found the voting records in the Kingman area. And he has a W for white next to his name on the voting records and also on the census records. John Franklin McKesson. And he ended up serving in the First World War. He was decorated. He's buried in the Veterans Cemetery in the Inland Empire of California today. And he also did some acting work, playing the part of an Indian. So evidently he was able to navigate between, when it was convenient to be Native American, he was Native American, but he could also pass as white. Now, one of the daughters married a Mexican man, and she identified as a Mexican American, both in her census records and socially. And another daughter identified as Native American, but she died in a boarding school. The girl that identified as Mexican eventually got divorced, and she married a man who was of Chumash Indian descent. And then miraculously, she goes from being Mexican to being Indian with an I next to her name on the census records. So you have the same two parents, one being a Euro-American from Nebraska, one being a full-blooded Northern Apache, and their children have three different ethnic identities. These are some of the folks that helped me along the way. And if you have any questions, I'd love to address a few things. I'm sure some of you have a few things to ask.
Did you think she was a slave or a
Well,
beloved daughter?
this is the thing. Legally, she was an indentured servant. The Howell Code, which I mentioned earlier, the only way that you could have a Native American child living with you if you were white is for them to be an indentured servant. I found documentation in the Arizona Republic back in the 1950s that said the father, on more than one occasion, Wales Arnold wanted to send Lulu to San Carlos. Evidently, having a Native American girl living with him caused a lot of stress in the community. You know, people would say things like, how could you have a savage living with you, and this sort of thing. So he didn't like all the stress that he was going through. If she was a true adopted daughter, he wouldn't think about sending her to the reservation. On the other hand, Sarah Arnold definitely developed a fictive kinship relationship with Lulu. I believe Sarah loved her, and it's not a stretch to understand why, because when they lived at Montezuma Well, when you think about everything that they went through at that period of time in the 1870s, literally living off the land, acquiring water every day, acquiring food, processing food, being in close proximity to one another day after day with no other outside people. Once in a while you'd have somebody come through who's traveling to California, but outside of that you don't have very much contact with the outside world. And I would imagine Sarah and Lulu became very close. But you do see this division within the family between the father wanting her to go back with her own people and the mother loving her and putting her foot down and saying, no, we can't do that to her. I also wonder if the circumstances surrounding why she got married immediately after the age of 18 was because of this pressure. Because legally, like I said, Wales Arnold was a constable. So here's a man enforcing the law in the Verde Valley. If you were breaking the law, you would look like a huge hypocrite. So for Link McKesson to come along and partner with her, because they could not legally marry, keep that in mind. They had a common law marriage. And from all accounts, they really loved one another. According to the memoir that I read, written by the daughter, they had a very loving relationship. But then we see another incident happen, because when Lulu does pass away, just before the turn of the century, she dies. We don't know the exact date. Some of the newspapers say December or November of 1897. Some say 1898. So I don't know, and I couldn't find the death certificate. She's buried in Kingman, but the date changes. What we do know as a fact, when she passed away, that's when the 2 girls were sent off to boarding schools. And they're half Anglo-American. And they were sent off to the Riverside boarding school, the Sherman boarding school in Riverside, California. Now the son was already 18 years of age at this point, so he was on his own. And he eventually went to work for the water company there in that county. And from all accounts, he had a really good life. His descendants today live in Kingman. They all identify as white Americans. I've had the least amount of cooperation with the Latino branch of the family. They've gone back and forth with me, like, why are you doing this? Why are you so interested? It's not your family. You should mind your own business. Sometimes they cooperate, sometimes they don't. I can't really put my finger on it. If it's anything like my grandmother, that may account for why they have that attitude. Because I know my grandmother, she wanted to disavow her Native American heritage. She identified as a Latina. She was a Mexican American. She didn't want to be an Indian. So I suspect that that may be the sentiment to account for why that part of the family hasn't cooperated with me too much. Yes. Anything else? Yes, ma'am.
Does the slave idea arise because of the chores and whatnot that she was required to do?
No, the slavery concept comes, if you read the Howell Code in 1864, remember the 13th Amendment was just passed. So you couldn't have chattel slavery happening because it would be illegal. But previous to Euro-Americans coming into this territory, many Mexican Americans had a peonage system already in place where they would have Native Americans working on their haciendas for food and board, but they wouldn't necessarily be paid. Well, that was no longer legal. So under the auspices of the Howell Code, what it did was you could foster a Native American child for a period of time. A boy could be fostered to the age of 21, a girl to the age of 18. Most of the boys were ranch hands, okay? And most of the girls worked as domestics. I don't know if you noticed the census record that I had up earlier, but the census record in California, even though they were in California for 1 year, Lulu was listed as a domestic servant, not as an adopted child or a child. So, her day was most likely filled with a lot of labor.
So was everybody.
Right, that was the way of life then, sure. But remember, it was not legal for them to adopt her. So the law in 1864 said you could only live there as an indentured servant. So that was their way to circumvent the slavery issue, where you could have a child who's not adopted working for you on your property legally. They wouldn't let them stay there.